The pool water glistened in the Arizona sun as Karen Matthews screamed into her cell phone. 911? Yes, there's a group of black men breaking into our community pool, and they're threatening my children. What Karen didn't see, what she was so focused on in her racist panic that she didn't notice, was that the threatening black man calmly swimming with her children while she called the police was actually Marcus Williams, a decorated Marine veteran with 2 Purple Hearts and a Medal of Honor who served 4 tours in Afghanistan. Saving lives while Karen was probably getting her nails done and complaining that her latte was too hot. And what she definitely didn't know was that Uncle Sam, had been working security at that gated community in Scottsdale for 2 years and had the entire confrontation on video, about to expose his racism to the entire country. You see, I'd seen Marcus move into this neighborhood about 6 months ago, one of maybe 3 black families in a community of 200 homes where white residents acted as if diversity was something that happened to other people elsewhere. And what I'd learned about Marcus's story, the sacrifices he made, the men he saved, the trauma he carried would make her an S911 call seem even more racist and pathetic than it already did. Before I tell you how Karen's false police report backfired so spectacularly that it ended her marriage and her social standing, let me ask you something that might make your blood boil. Have you ever seen someone call the police on black people for literally existing in a space where racist white people thought they didn't belong? Leave your city in the comments and tell me about the most racist Karen calls 911 incident you've ever seen or experienced, because what happened next at that Scottsdale community pool will show you exactly what happens when racism meets a war hero who faced threats worse than the manufactured hysteria of a suburban housewife, you know? Now, if you'll excuse this old man for a deep breath before diving into the story. These instances of veterans being disrespected by people who never sacrificed anything always hit me hard. At my age, having worked alongside military personnel who returned from war with invisible wounds, I've bet some of the strongest people look exactly like the ones Karen called threateners. Thanks for sticking with Uncle Sam while I tell you about one of the most satisfying examples of racist karma I've ever witnessed. To understand how Marcus Williams ended up being treated like a criminal in his own neighborhood pool, we need to go back about 8 years to when he was still Sergeant Marcus Williams, leading a Marine reconnaissance unit through the mountains of Helmand Province, while Karen Matthews likely argued with store managers over expired coupons other than his own pain. Marcus had joined the Marines right out of high school in South Phoenix, seeking a way to serve his country while earning money for college and building a life beyond the poverty his family had struggled with for generations. Marcus' parents raised him and his 3 younger siblings on his father's income as a bus driver, and his mother's work as a housekeeper for wealthy families in North Scottsdale, the same neighborhoods where Marcus would eventually buy his own home, though at the time such a future seemed impossible. His childhood was marked by watching his parents work multiple jobs while still struggling to keep the lights on and food on the table, teaching Marcus that hard work didn't always lead to success when the system was rigged against you. But the Army offered something civilian life didn't, a true meritocracy, where your performance mattered more than the color of your skin or your parents' bank account. Or at least that's what the recruiter promised. And Marcus wanted to believe it enough to enlist 2 days after his 18th birthday, boarding the ship for boot camp at Camp Pendleton while his mother cried and his father tried to hide his pride and worry. Marcus turned out to be a natural Marine, excelling at everything from marksmanship and tactical planning to the kind of calm leadership under pressure that separates ordinary soldiers from exceptional ones. He rose quickly through the ranks, becoming a sergeant in his junior year and being selected for Force Reconnaissance, the Marines' elite special operations unit that handled the most dangerous missions in the most hostile territory. His first deployment to Afghanistan in 2011 was a brutal education in the realities of modern warfare, IEDs, that could vaporize a Humvee in seconds. Firefights that erupted without warning. The constant stress of knowing that every rock pile or abandoned building could be hiding. Insurgents waiting to ambush your patrol. Marcus lost 2 men from his unit during that first tour, friends he trained with and trusted with his life, and he came home carrying guilt and grief that no amount of therapy could fully process. But he went back. 3 more tours between 2012 and 2016, each one harder than the last, each one adding new scars, both physical and psychological, that would never fully heal. The second tour earned him his first Purple Heart, after shrapnel from an RPG tore through his left shoulder during a firefight where his unit was pinned down for 6 hours. The third tour brought the second Purple Heart when an IED struck, left him with a traumatic brain injury and permanent hearing loss in his right ear. The fourth tour, that is when Marcus did something that would earn him the Medal of Honor and fundamentally change how he saw himself in his service. His unit was providing security for a medical evacuation operation in a village that had been hit by a Taliban attack. When the secondary assault trapped them in a building with wounded civilians and no clear escape route, Marcus single-handedly held off the enemy assault for 45 minutes while his team evacuated the wounded, taking multiple gunshot wounds in the process and refusing medical treatment until every civilian and every Marine was safely extracted. He killed an estimated 15 enemy combatants, saved the lives of 23 people, both American and Afghan, and nearly died from blood loss before the medevac helicopter could get him out. The Medal of Honor citation described his actions as extraordinary heroism and selfless valor in the face of overwhelming enemy forces. But Marcus never talked about that day without mentioning the Afghan children he'd saved. The Marines who'd made it home to their families because he'd refused to abandon his position. For him, the medal represented the people he'd saved, not his own bravery. But medals don't cure PTSD, and heroism doesn't erase trauma. Marcus came home from his final deployment in 2016, carrying physical wounds that would heal and psychological wounds that would not nightmares that left him screaming and soaked in sweat. Hypervigilance that made crowds and loud noises unbearable. Survivor-esque guilt that whispered he should have died instead of the friends who didn't make it home. The transition to civilian life was harder than any combat mission Marcus had survived. The VA provided some support, disability payments, therapy sessions, medication that helped but never quite fixed the broken parts. But nothing could replace the sense of purpose and brotherhood he'd left behind in the Marines. Civilian jobs felt meaningless after leading men through life or death situations. Normal problems felt trivial after watching friends die. Marcus spent 2 years drifting, working construction jobs when his physical and mental health allowed. Living in a studio apartment in South Phoenix that reminded him too much of the poverty, he thought military service would help him escape. His disability checks covered basic expenses, but the future he'd imagined, college degree, career, family, homeownership, seemed impossibly distant when some days just getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain. The turning point came when Marcus met Angela Rodriguez at a VA support group for veterans dealing with PTSD and reintegration challenges. Angela was an Army combat medic who'd served in Iraq, carrying her own trauma from treating casualties under fire and losing patients she couldn't save. They recognized something in each other, the specific kind of brokenness that comes from military service. The shared language of people who'd seen and done things that civilians could never fully understand. Their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual understanding rather than romantic gestures. Two wounded people finding comfort and not having to explain or justify their struggles to someone who hadn't been there. They married in 2018 at the courthouse with two veteran friends as witnesses in a fancy ceremony because they both rather spend money on their future than on a single day of celebration. Angela worked as a nurse at a VA hospital, and their combined incomes, her salary plus Marcus' disability payments and his construction work when he could handle it, finally provided enough financial stability to start planning for the future they both fought to protect. They had two children in quick succession, Elijah born in 2019 and Amara in 2021. And Marcus discovered that fatherhood gave him something he'd been missing since leaving the Marine, a clear mission that mattered more than his own pain. The decision to buy a house in North Scottsdale came from Angela's determination to give their children opportunities she and Marcus hadn't had growing up. The neighborhood had excellent schools, low crime, community amenities like pools and parks, and the kind of stability that military families craved after years of uncertainty. It didn't matter that they'd be one of only a handful of black families in an overwhelmingly white community. They had every right to live wherever they could afford, and Marcus's VA loan plus their savings made the down payment possible. But what Marcus and Angela didn't fully anticipate was how uncomfortable their presence would make certain neighbors who viewed the community's whiteness as a feature rather than an accident. From the day they moved in, they faced the microaggressions and subtle hostility that black families encounter when they dare to exist in spaces white people consider exclusively theirs. Neighbors who didn't welcome them with the casserole deliveries that other new residents received. HO and notices about minor violations that seemed selectively enforced. Questions about whether they actually bought their house or were renting, with the implication that black homeownership in this price range must be explained or justified. The kind of everyday racism that's hard to prove but impossible to ignore when you're experiencing it constantly. My involvement in Marcus's story began when I started working security for the Scottsdale Springs community about 6 months after he moved in. The Homeowners Association hired me to patrol the neighborhood and monitor the community facilities. A standard arrangement for upscale developments where residents wanted to feel safe while keeping undesirables out, though they never quite defined what made someone undesirable beyond implications that made the racism pretty obvious. I noticed Marcus immediately because he was hard to miss. A clearly fit black man in his early 30s who moved with the controlled awareness that comes from military training, always scanning his environment, always positioned where he could see threats coming. I recognized another veteran just from his body language and the way he interacted with his kids. Protective, but not smothering. Teaching them awareness without scaring them. We started talking during one of my patrols when I saw him working in his yard, and within 10 minutes, I'd learned he was a Marine vet with 4 tours, 2 Purple Hearts, and a Medal of Honor he never mentioned until I specifically asked about the distinctive ribbon on his truck's license plate frame. The man was a genuine American hero living in a neighborhood where certain residents treated him like a threat based on nothing but his skin color. The racism Marcus's family faced escalated throughout their first year in the community, mostly centered around the pool and park facilities that were technically open to all residents, but seemed to generate complaints whenever Marcus's family used them. Other homeowners would call the HOA office, claiming the pool was too crowded on days when Marcus's kids were swimming, despite dozens of white children using it without generating similar complaints. The worst offender was Karen Matthews, a 44-year-old stay-at-home mother whose husband worked as a pharmaceutical sales executive and whose entire identity seemed built around perceived superiority to everyone around her. Karen treated the community pool like her personal property, constantly complaining about noise, behavior, and inappropriate activities that somehow only became problems when black families were present. Karen had targeted Marcus's family from the beginning, making comments to other residents about those people lowering property values and creating safety concerns, despite zero evidence of anything except a black family existing in a space she'd apparently claimed as whites only. Her complaints to the HOA office became so frequent that management started ignoring them, recognizing they were motivated by racism rather than legitimate concerns. The confrontation that would expose Karen's racism to national attention began on a Saturday afternoon, June, when Arizona temperatures hit 112 degrees and every family in the neighborhood was trying to use the community pool to escape the brutal heat. Marcus and Angela had brought Elijah and Amara to the pool around 2 p.m., planning to let the kids swim for a few hours while they relaxed poolside, a completely normal activity that shouldn't have generated any conflict. But Karen was already at the pool with her 2 children, and the sight of Marcus's family arriving seemed to trigger something in her racist worldview that demanded immediate action. She started by making loud comments to other white parents about the pool getting too crowded, despite plenty of open space and fewer people than typical for a weekend afternoon. When her passive-aggressive commentary didn't drive Marcus's family away, Karen escalated to directly confronting Angela about the family's right to use the facility. "Excuse me," Karen said with false politeness, approaching where Angela was sitting, "but I don't recognize you from the neighborhood. Are you residents here? Or are you visiting someone?" Angela, who dealt with this kind of racist interrogation too many times to count, responded calmly. "We live at 2847 Desert Vista Drive. We've been residents for 10 months. Is there something you need?" The specific address seemed to throw Karen off her script slightly, but she quickly recovered with a new line of attack. "Oh, well, I just want to make sure everyone using the pool is actually authorized." We've had problems with non-residents sneaking in, and the HOA has asked us to verify that everyone belongs here. The HOA hasn't asked residents to verify anything, Angela replied, her voice hardening slightly. What they have asked is that residents not harass other residents based on racist assumptions about who does or doesn't belong in this community. She started by making loud comments to other white parents about the pool getting too crowded, despite plenty of open space and fewer people than typical for a weekend afternoon. When her passive-aggressive commentary didn't drive Marcus's family away, Karen escalated to directly confronting Angela about the family's right to use the facility. "Excuse me," Karen said with false politeness, approaching where Angela was sitting. "But I don't recognize you from the neighborhood. Are you residents here? Or are you visiting someone?" Angela, who dealt with this kind of racist interrogation too many times to count, responded calmly. "We live at 2847 Desert Vista Drive. We've been residents for 10 months. Is there something you need?" The specific address seemed to throw Karen off her script slightly, but she quickly recovered with a new line of attack. "Oh, well, I just want to make sure everyone using the pool is actually authorized. We've had problems with non-residents sneaking in, and the HOA has asked us to verify that everyone belongs here." "The HOA hasn't asked residents to verify anything," Angela replied, her voice hardening slightly. "What they have asked is that residents not harass other residents based on racist assumptions about who does or doesn't belong in this community." Karen's face flushed red at having her racism named so directly. "That's ridiculous. I'm not racist. I'm just concerned about security and making sure our community standards are maintained. It has nothing to do with anything except following the rules." Marcus had been in the pool with his kids during this exchange, but the elevated voices drew his attention. He recognized immediately what was happening, his wife being questioned about their right to exist in a space they'd be paid for, their children being implicitly accused of not belonging, all wrapped in the coded language that racists use when they know they can't say what they really mean. He swam to the edge of the pool and pulled himself out, water streaming off his powerfully built frame as he walked over to where Angela and Karen were confronting each other. His presence seemed to trigger even deeper fear and racism in Karen, whose expression shifted from faux concern to genuine panic. "Ma'am," Marcus said, quietly, using the same calm tone he'd used to de-escalate situations in combat zones. "My wife already explained that we're residents here. I'm Marcus Williams. We live 3 streets over. We've been here almost a year. Is there something specific we can help you with? Or can we go back to enjoying the pool with our kids?" But Karen's racism had fully activated now, triggered by a combination of being challenged by a black woman and confronted by a black man whose physical presence her racist worldview interpreted as threatening despite his calm demeanor and completely non-aggressive body language. "You need to leave," Turin announced, her voice rising. "You're making people uncomfortable, and I don't believe you to leave here. Show me your resident ID or I'm calling security." "I am security," I said, stepping forward from where I'd been observing the confrontation while documenting it on the community as security cameras. "And I can confirm that Marcus and Angela Williams are residents in good standing who have every right to use this facility. What I can't confirm is your authority to demand identification from other residents, or your claim that anyone except you is uncomfortable." Karen whirled to face me, clearly not expecting the security guard to side against her racist behavior. "Sam, I don't know what they told you, but these people are being aggressive and threatening, and they need to be removed before someone gets hurt." "The only aggression I've observed," I replied calmly, "is you questioning this family's right to use the pool based on nothing except your racist assumptions. Now you can either apologize and move on, or you can continue making false accusations, and I'll file a report with the HOA about harassment of residents." That's when Karen made the decision that would transform her from local racist to national symbol of white fragility and abuse of 911 services. She pulled out her phone and dialed, her voice shifting from confrontational to panicked as she adopted the frightened white woman persona that has gotten black people killed by police. 911. Yes, there's a group of black people trespassing at our community pool, and they're re-threatening my children. Karen's voice trembled with manufactured fear as she spoke to the dispatcher. I asked them to leave, and they refused. And now the man is being aggressive, and I'm scared for my safety and my kids' safety. Please send police immediately. The whole pool area had gone silent, with all the white families stopping their activities to watch the confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable, recognizing that Karen's 911 call was a racist lie. But nobody spoke up to contradict her false claims. A few started recording on their phones, probably figuring they were about to witness police brutality against a black family. Marcus's response to Karen's 911 call was informed by years of military training and, unfortunately, necessary education about how to survive encounters with police while being black in America. He calmly told his kids to get out of the pool and stay close to their mother. He kept his hands visible at all times. He spoke clearly and respectfully, despite the rage I could see building behind his eyes. Angela, get the kids and start packing up, Marcus said quietly. I'm going to stand right here with my hands visible until the police arrive. Don't want to give them any excuse to. Escalate the situation. This is insane, Angela responded, her voice breaking with frustration and fear. We're literally just trying to swim at our own community pool. Why does this keep happening? Because people like her think they can weaponize police against us, Marcus replied, his voice carrying the weariness of someone who'd had this exact experience too many times. But we're going to stay calm, we're going to document everything, and we're going to show everyone watching that we did nothing wrong. The wait for police felt endless, those probably only 10 minutes. Karen used the time to give a performance worthy of an Oscar, crying and shaking and positioning herself where other residents could see her fear, while making sure her children looked appropriately scared of threatening black family that had done literally nothing except exist. When the Scottsdale police arrived, 2 officers, both white, both probably briefed by dispatch about a threatening situation. Their approach was cautious in a way that made it clear they viewed Marcus as a potential threat rather than a resident who'd been harassed. Their hands hovered near their weapons as they addressed the situation. Sir, we received a call about a disturbance, the senior officer said, directing his attention to Marcus. Can you tell me what's going on here? Marcus kept his hands visible and his voice calm. Officer, my name is Marcus Williams. I'm a resident of this community at 2847 Desert Vista Drive. My wife and I brought our kids to the community pool, which we have every right to use as paying ON members. This woman, he gestured toward Corinne, approached us demanding to see identification and claiming we don't belong here. When we confirmed we're residents, she escalated and called 911, claiming we were threatening her, which is completely false. He's lying. Karen interjected, her voice pitched higher in distress. I asked politely if they were residents because I didn't recognize them, and he became aggressive and threatening. I was scared for my children's safety. The officer turned to address the other poolgoers. Did anyone else witness what happened here? Several white residents suddenly became very interested in their phones or their children, unwilling to contradict Corinne's false narrative, despite having seen the whole interaction. The power of white, solidarity, and the fear of being labeled a race traitor kept potential witnesses silent. That's when I stepped forward, pulling out my phone with the security footage I'd been recording. Officer, I'm Sam Rodriguez, head of security for this community. I witnessed the entire interaction, and I have video evidence showing that Mr. Williams and his family did nothing threatening or aggressive. What you have here is a white resident making a false 911 call to harass black residents she doesn't think belong in this neighborhood. The senior officer's expression shifted slightly as he processed this. Information from a security professional rather than just competing claims from civilians. Can I see that footage? I showed him the video, which clearly captured Karen approaching Angela with her racist interrogation. Marcus calmly trying to de-escalate. and Corinne's deliberate decision to call 911 with fabricated claims about threats and aggression. The footage also showed other pool-goers going about their business completely unconcerned, contradicting Corinne's claims that people felt threatened. While the officer reviewed the footage, his partner ran Marcus's information and came back with results that clearly surprised him. Sergeant Marcus Williams, Medal of Honor recipient. Sir, I have your service record here showing 4 combat deployments and ... Wow. The dynamic of the encounter shifted immediately as both officers recognized they were dealing with a decorated war hero rather than a threatening black man. The senior officer's entire demeanor changed, shifting from cautious law enforcement to respectful deference. Mr. Williams, thank you for your service, and I apologize for the circumstances of this call, the officer said, his voice carrying genuine respect now. Based on the security footage and the evidence, it's clear that you and your family were harassed and that the 911 call was made under false pretenses. Ma'am, he turned to Corinne. Filing a false police report is a crime, and using 911 services for non-emergency situations is a misdemeanor. Corinne's face went through several expressions as she realized her racist plan had backfired spectacularly. I wasn't filing a false report. I genuinely felt threatened. Just because he's some kind of military person doesn't mean he wasn't being aggressive. Ma'am, the video shows no aggression from Mr. Williams or his family. What it does show is you demanding identification from residents you had no authority to question, making assumptions about their right to be here based on their appearance, and then calling 911 with fabricated claims when they refused to submit to your harassment. The officer continued, I'm not going to arrest you today, but I am filing a report about this incident. If you make another false 911 call, you will be charged, and I strongly suggest you examine why you felt threatened by a family peacefully using their community pool. But the real consequences for Corinne were only beginning. Multiple residents had been recording the confrontation on their phones, and the footage went viral within hours. The video showed Corinne's racist interrogation, her false 911 call, and the revelation that she'd been harassing a Medal of Honor recipient for having the audacity to swim while black in her neighborhood. The headlines wrote themselves. Arizona Corinne calls cops on Medal of Honor recipient at pool. Racist woman's 911 call backfires spectacularly when victim turns out to be war hero. White woman weaponizes police against black veteran and his family. The national outrage was swift and comprehensive. Corinne's full name and address were quickly identified by internet sleuths, leading to consequences that extended far beyond public shaming. Her husband's employer, the pharmaceutical company, issued a statement condemning racism and announcing they were reviewing whether his wife's behavior reflected values incompatible with company culture. Corporate code for he's probably getting fired. The HOA held an emergency meeting and voted to fine Corinne $5,000 for harassment of residents and misuse of community resources. Several residents who'd witnessed the incident but stayed silent faced their own reckoning on social media, called out for their complicity in Corinne's racism. But the most satisfying outcome was what happened when local media caught up with Marcus for an interview about the incident. Standing in front of his home in the neighborhood Corinne had tried to exclude him from, wearing a simple t-shirt that showed the scars on his shoulder from his Purple Heart wounds, Marcus delivered a statement that encapsulated both his dignity and his frustration. I served 4 tours in Afghanistan, Marcus said, his voice steady despite obvious emotion. I led Marines through firefights, I saved lives. I nearly died multiple times defending this country and the freedoms we all enjoy. I came home with 2 Purple Hearts and a Medal of Honor, and I thought I'd earned the right to live wherever I could afford and raise my kids in peace. But apparently, he continued, my military service, my sacrifices, my wounds, none of that matters to people like Corinne Matthews, too. I'm just a black man who doesn't belong in her neighborhood. Someone threatening enough to call 900, despite doing nothing except swimming with my kids. That tells you everything you need to know about American racism. It doesn't care about your service record or your character, only about your skin color. The interview generated even more outrage, with veterans organizations and civil rights groups using Marcus's case to highlight the ongoing racism that Black service members face even after risking their lives for the country. The local VA chapter organized a Swim with Marcus event at the community pool, bringing dozens of veterans to show solidarity and explicitly challenge the racist gatekeeping that had targeted his family. Curran's husband filed for divorce within 2 weeks, releasing a statement saying his wife's actions and values were incompatible with the kind of family he wanted to raise their children in. The divorce settlement was reportedly very unfavorable to Curran, who lost the house, custody of the kids, and most financial support. Curran herself attempted several public apologies, all of which rang hollow because they focused on her being misunderstood, rather than acknowledging the racism that had motivated her behavior. She claimed she'd been having a bad day and overreacted to a stressful situation, never quite admitting that she'd weaponized police against a Black family based on nothing but racist assumptions. The Scottsdale Springs community implemented new policies, explicitly prohibiting residents from demanding identification from other residents and establishing serious consequences for harassment based on race, religion, or national origin. The changes came too late to undo the damage, but they represented recognition that the community's previous tolerance of casual racism needed to end. Marcus and his family continued living in the neighborhood, though the experience had obviously taken a toll. Angela mentioned in later interviews that they'd considered moving somewhere less hostile, but decided to stay specifically because giving in to racist pressure would mean letting people like Karen win. "We have just as much right to be here as anyone else," Angela said. "Our money is just as green. Our kids deserve these schools and these parks. And we're not going to let racism drive us out of the home we worked hard to afford. If that makes certain people uncomfortable, that's their problem to work through, not ours." Years later, the incident remained a viral touchstone in discussions about racist 911 calls, the weaponization of police against Black people, and the particular hypocrisy of people who claim to support the military while harassing Black veterans. Training programs for 911 dispatchers began using Curran's call as an example of how racism manifests in false emergency reports. Marcus became an advocate for other Black veterans facing discrimination, working with civil rights organizations to document and challenge the racism that military service apparently doesn't protect you from. His Medal of Honor gave him a platform that he used to speak uncomfortable truths about American society's treatment of Black people regardless of their service or sacrifice. As I reflect on this case years later, I'm struck by the particular cruelty of Curran's racism, not just treating Marcus as a threat, but doing so while he was simply trying to give his children the same poolside summer fun that white families take for granted. The incident exemplified how American racism operates, denying Black people access to ordinary pleasures while justifying it through manufactured fears and false claims. The investigation reminded me that military service and medals don't protect Black people from racism, that white fragility and perceived property rights often trump actual heroism in determining who belongs in certain spaces. Marcus had survived Taliban fighters and IEDs, but he couldn't escape the racism embedded in an American neighborhood that viewed his skin color as more threatening than his service record. So, what do you think about racist 911 calls and the way some white people weaponize police against Black folks just existing in public spaces? Have you witnessed or experienced this kind of harassment where someone called the cops on you or someone else for basically nothing except being Black in a place where racists didn't think you belonged? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, bro. Tell me what city you're watching from and share any experiences you've had with Karens who think their white fear justifies calling armed police on innocent people. That's the end of this particular story about Uncle Sam's investigations into workplace justice and social equality. But the fight continues every day in communities across America where Black families face harassment for existing in spaces that white folks treat as exclusive territory. The lesson remains the same. Racism is pervasive, dangerous, and completely incompatible with the values that veterans like Marcus literally fought to defend. Remember, character matters more than skin color. Service deserves respect regardless of race, and calling 911 on innocent people because you're racist should have serious legal consequences. Because sometimes the threatening black man you're calling the cops on turns out to be a Medal of Honor recipient who's demonstrated more courage and character than you'll show in your entire privileged life. And sometimes it takes an old security guard with 40 years of experience. Documenting injustice to make sure the truth comes out and racists face consequences for weaponizing fear against people who've earned respect through service and sacrifice.